All right, welcome to Mindful Live 87. Yes, Mindful Live 87. It is the 2nd of June. The year is speeding along. 2nd of June in the year 2022. Welcome to the Mindful Live number 87. I am your host, Nathan Springer. Thank you for joining me tonight. Yes, what are we talking about tonight? Well, the topic I have that I've seen generally over the news tonight that I'm going to talk about has to do with the consequences of the pandemic. But the consequences of the pandemic, I think, is an incorrect way to phrase it. Good night, I love boots. Good night, Shy Panda. I think the way how many people phrase it as being the consequences of the pandemic is actually an incorrect way to phrase it, because these things aren't directly the consequences of the pandemic. The consequences of the pandemic itself would have been death and the sadness that would follow such, obviously. By no means minimizing that, but these would be the consequences of our actions to it, our reactions to it. And diving straight in, I saw a story over in the Newsday about a homeless cook. Homeless cook, I just need help. And I think when I look at these stories, when I look at stories like this, and there are many such stories, it demonstrates something to me about the understanding about how reality works with people on the fringe, people on the edge. If we're all, think of it as if the earth were flat. As if the earth were flat. I know some people enjoy such beliefs, but imagine as if it were the earth were flat, and all of us are crowded on this flat earth, and it is packed to capacity, barely room for anyone else to be added on. Now, people who are poorer, people who are less privileged, they are considered to be closer to the edges of this flat earth, and the wealthier you are, the more resources you have access to, the closer to the middle of this you are. Now, anytime there's some shaking happening on this flat earth, anytime the flat earth piece of the edge crumbles off, anytime too many people get added on, anytime some kind of meteor drops inside of the middle of this flat earth, anytime anything happens like that, the first people to fall off, obviously, will be the people on the edge. And that's just the reality of it. And I think in some of the reactions to the pandemic, what many people were attempting to point out since then, that although the pandemic may and was and is a serious issue, how you treat with it needs to keep into consideration that the treatment can create very serious issues also. Homeless cook, I just need help. A 54-year-old man is asking for help to get off the streets after losing everything he had during the pandemic. Dudnat Isaac was spotted resting under a tree on Petra Street, Woodbrook, where he told Newsday on Wednesday unforeseen circumstances coupled with problems caused by the pandemic had left him destitute. Isaac told his story days after Woodbrook residents complained to Mayor Joel Martinez of an increase in socially displaced people taking up residence along the streets in the area during the Port of Spain Corporation's monthly statutory meeting last Friday at City Hall. So, more homeless people in Woodbrook. Blessed night, Rhea. Glad to see you back in the chat with caps lock on as per usual, letting us know that you mean business once you step in. Good night. People have responsibilities now. We have bedtimes. What are you speaking of, Rhea? I have been here every single night around 9:30-ish p.m. every night. Those reactions were or are related to the state of the nation prior to the pandemic. We are vulnerable. Obviously, that That is the point of the whole thing. We are vulnerable. Now, the reality also is that we would always be vulnerable, and some people try to make it seem like the solution to these things would be for us to make everyone invulnerable, and that's not true. That's not possible. It's not possible to wow. It's not possible to make that happen for everyone. 9 p.m. is bedtime. Well, at this present moment, there isn't any way for me to do this live before that time. So maybe in due time, as things progress and the live matures, who knows, maybe we can pull back the time to an earlier time to get more people in before the bedtime of 9 p.m. as Ria says. But at the moment, this is the time that we have. All right, yes. Isaac told this story, right. Isaac lived with his parents at Observatory Street, Port of Spain, when they died almost 20 years ago. He moved in with his sister in Woodbrook after he was thrown out of his parents' home by another relative. Well, that right there sounds like some family bacchanal. When I get the husband to mind me, I'll be able to join at these hours religiously. Husband to mind you, eh? Leaning into those heteronormative, patriarchal, regressive cultural stereotypes, are we? I like to tease. While living in Woodbrook, he helped out at his sister's senior citizens' home on Petra Street as a chef, and sometimes he would care for residents in the home. I spent the last 20 years helping people, and now when I need help, there's no one here for me. I am not homeless, you know. I just want to get somewhere to live. I don't do drugs and things. I just want to better my life. Now, this is not a joke, but I like the English language. I like communication and the idiosyncrasies of our language, as it were, and how we speak, etc. And for him to say that, you know, I am not homeless, you know, I just want to get somewhere to live, is kind of like, I really do hope that uncle gets somewhere to stay, somewhere to live, somewhere to be secure, and somewhere to be comfortable. But to say you're not homeless, but you want somewhere to live is you're you know, it says what it says. It says what it says. But I really do hope for the best for him. And these cases, these kinds of cases, now, I think, personally, this is my view as a Trinidadian walking around. Now, I don't have these statistics on this. I don't think anyone in Trinidad and Tobago has some of these statistics on this. But this is just my view as a Trinidadian walking around. I found that for quite some time in Trinidad and Tobago, Goodnight Fearless 1512, for quite some time in Trinidad and Tobago, I might say during the 2000s, etc., a lot of the homeless people, you may have said, were there for way more complex reasons than just not having somewhere to live. And that's just the truth of homelessness. So, like, homelessness and the other euphemisms for it, if you track how language changed over time, you'll see that some of this has to do with trying to be politically correct and trying not to offend people, etc., etc., etc. But if you're being honest, you'd also know that it's a lot of these issues aren't as simple as people not having a home. You'd follow it, and before they used to call them vagrants, and you know that sounded too horrible, so you know you wanted a less distasteful sounding term, and I don't have a problem with that, but it could sometimes obscure from the reality of what certain situations might be. And I might say for a very long time, not that very long time, but for some time in Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of the people that you saw on the street, a lot of them, the issues had probably more to do with drug abuse and mental illnesses. And what you do with people like that is a serious thing, something that should be solved, but isn't something as easy to be solved potentially as someone just not having somewhere to live. Because if you have someone who is addicted to a drug, you can't just take them up and put them in a home and expect that they would live normally there. There's something driving them. They may take everything in that home and sell it to get that drug. That's an issue. And if you have someone that has mental illness issues, mental illness issues, and you just take them and put them in a home somewhere. If you put them with someone else, there would be very likely issues there. There may be self-harm issues. There may be issues with whether they would harm someone else, and you just can't just pick them up like that. And then these people, nonetheless, whether they have issues or not, they very likely would be adult human beings that are supposed to have that assumption, at least, of independence on them. You're supposed to treat them as independent human beings. Now, because of that, what you do with them, you have to be careful nonetheless. You can't just pick them up and put them somewhere. It's up to them where they want to go to some extent. Shai Panda says most family quick to discard the mentally ill. I would not doubt that there are many family members that are quick to discard the mentally ill, but I would also urge caution in that, because I also know of many families who spent lots of resources, lots of time, lots of effort, lots of danger too, trying to pull back some of their mentally ill family members. And these people are adults, these people are humans. They choose what they want to do, and there's only so much that even family members can do in some cases. These things are just much more complex than some people like to make it seem. And I think for quite some time, a lot of Trinidad's homelessness, a lot of the street dwellers had a lot to do with these more complex issues. But the residents in Woodbrook are seeing an increase in the amount of people living on those streets. They are seeing an increase in it. And then if you listen to someone like this, if we are to take what he is saying at his word, and there's no more we can do for that. I do not know the man personally. I am not a private investigator to go and investigate whether the man is speaking the truth or not. But we can take him at his word. And if we are to take him at his word, what he is saying here is, I'm not homeless, I just want to get somewhere to live. I don't do drugs and things. I just want to better my life. In tears, he pointed to the senior's home just a stone's throw away from where he sat, holding a garbage bag with a few clothes and documents inside it. Isaac said when his sister fell ill in 2020, right before the start of the pandemic, his life spiraled out of control. He was asked to leave his sister's home and fired from working there soon after. She died after they cut her legs off, her kidneys shut down, and nothing went properly. I have nobody. I miss my sister so much, and it's hard. He struggled to find a job as restaurants and other food establishments were affected by the government's restrictions to contain the COVID-19. You see, that's the point I was making. When someone, Edwin EDGR, says when someone don't have the control of their mental faculty, the authority will have to take. Well, yes, but that is something that could be difficult to ascertain. To say when someone really doesn't have the control over their mental faculties is something difficult to just assume. And to say that in a vacuum when you're not dealing with the situation is very easy. Yeah, when somebody go mad, the government will just come in and take them. Of course, yeah, of course. What else would happen? But that's actually a more complex issue than that. And for example, how long ago was this? A couple years ago, I remember someone in the public service, some lady, started to act what some called erratically, and they called the mental hospital for her, and they took the lady, carried her in against her will, saying that she was having a breakdown, etc., etc. Not to know some while after that, I believe she won her court case and won some money because it was a case where she was angry for some other reason, and someone in seniority over her took it as their job to do such a thing. So you actually have to be very careful when it comes to intervening in such situations, even when it is believed that someone doesn't have their full mental capacities about them. And in this case, what I'm seeing in this case is what I was saying at the very beginning. When there are many people in society living, and sometimes they're living comfortably in their own view. They're comfortable, they're pleased, they're content with their life, but they are actually on the fringe. They're holding on to the general society with their last grip. They're at the end of the rope and they tied a knot there just so that they wouldn't slip off. But they're living and they're partially content. And when society is functioning in a smooth manner, they are able to make a living off of the ends of society. This man is able to make a living off of his sister's home because there are enough people coming in the home. She can give him a little job to do there, give him a chef job. He is able to make a living and earn his keep, and he may be content with this, speaking to some of the older people, and that I could see that being a contented life for certain people. He is cooking for them, he is interacting with them, he might be having a complete life in his view with his sister there. Pandemic comes, sister dies, cannot get another job, cannot hold on to this job. Pandemic shuts down the food industry, so cannot get another cooking job, and he was just there on the brink and he fell off the edge. And now he's on the street, not as someone who is addicted to drugs, not as someone who has a mental illness necessarily, if we are to believe his story as it is said here in the newspaper. He is someone that just fell off the edge. And when you consider that the reason for this, yes, you could say it as the pandemic, but actually, it wasn't the pandemic. The pandemic did not close down the food industry. The pandemic did not close down the restaurants. Those were the lockdowns. Those were the reactions. Those were the decisions that were made in order to compensate, in order to help barricade us and protect us from the pandemic. Okay, that's what the decision was said to be made for, in order to protect us. I understand that's the reason that was said, but you're seeing what that protection costs. The protection has a cost. And when people back then were pointing out that this would have a cost, this is a running machine. Granted, the machine isn't perfectly running. There are problems all around in the machine. Right, correct, true. No one is denying that. But the machine is currently running. For you to just stop that machine, what is going to happen would be all of those that were on the fringes of the machine, just barely hanging on. You stop that machine, they are going to fall off. And now they are off. They are outside of this society. And we are here trying to scrape them and catch them back up. And in the long run, the estimation now, the the knowledge now is to find out which is worse. Would the decisions we made to stop the spread of this deadly disease during the pandemic, would those decisions that were made back then, would they match in the cost when we line it up with the consequences we are paying now? Good night, unknown boy. That's a paradox, using the imperfect mental faculties to discern such. Every action has consequences. I wonder what could have been done differently, though. Well, there were many things that could have been done differently. To go to the extreme, to the ultimate extreme, what could have been done differently is nothing. You could have left it. Leave the system. Everybody function as is. Deal with it as you must. who knows what that consequence would have been. I am not saying necessarily that that would have been the better choice, but I'm saying that was another option. To act like that was not an option is incorrect. That was an actual option. You could have done that. So what would the consequences have been otherwise? Because we are seeing these consequences here now. Since then, he's been living on the pavement in Woodbrook for the past 3 years. He refuses to go to the center for socially displaced people at Riverside Plaza. He said he feels safer on the streets than at the center because he does not enjoy being around excessive drug users. They're taking drugs and cocaine. I don't mix up with them thing. Additionally, Isaac explained that the businesses around the area often give him meals, so he does not mind being on that particular street. So he's explaining it there. He's explaining it there. Sometimes you wonder, but why this person on the street? Well, this man just explained it there. Yes, there are places that the homeless people can go, but bear in mind, think of it, you're a human. They are humans too. Granted, they are homeless, but they are humans. You as a human, would you really want to go and stay in a place with 100 other strange homeless people? I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I mean, if it was 100 other homeless friends of mine, fine. But if they're strangers, and all homeless people aren't the same, there are criminals living on the streets, there may be serial killers living on the streets, their minds addled by the crimes they committed, they're in some kind of mental dark spiral, and a street dweller might know that. He knows that, okay, you see Freddie on the corner there by Frederick Street, Freddie on Frederick Street, he's a calm guy, he's just homeless by chance. But you see Boris around the corner by the plaza, well, no, he's a serial killer that escaped. They locked him up in the United States and then they deported him here. None of his family wanted him, so now he's on the street, so you kind of stay clear of him. All of them aren't the same, and then you take them all and tell them, here, let's help you, come, bunch you inside of this building. Yes, oh no, all of you all go inside of there, yes, and spend the night there and clink clank lock the door in there at night. Listen. If I just slipped off the edge of society and I am living on the street, I'm just trying to mind my business, hopefully get a little job end somewhere and maybe rent something, and then you lock me inside there with everyone else on the streets, I will not be happy. That's kind of understandable. Isaac became inconsolable when he told Newsday thieves had made off with his 2 phones, passport, and visa. Throughout the interview, Isaac frantically foraged through his bag in search of his ID card and realized it was missing. At this realization, he became distraught. First, they thieved my phone, B-Mobile and Digicel, because sometimes I just sleep away here. I'm not sure when it happened, but I study in my ID card. I don't take drugs, nothing. My other sister has 2 houses, but she said nobody coming back there. And when I went home, all the police were there. She told them I'm wanted. I'm not wanted. Very depressing. Very depressing indeed. Now, the reality is that people like this, people in extremely unfortunate situations, always exist in society. They would always exist in society. I don't think there's anything we can do on this earth as it is to avoid such a thing from happening. There would always be very unfortunate cases in society. However, I think it is our duty as a society also to attempt as much as is possible to not create situations that put more people in the position to be in that unfortunate scenario. There are certain things that you can do that create conditions that put more people in those positions. People, for all intents and purposes, we can be defined as animals. We function very similarly to many animals. You have an incentive structure there, and people by and large would act a certain way. You put an incentive there, they act a certain way. You take away that incentive, they don't act that way. You put a barrier there, you make things more difficult. You make things more difficult, the people who are less able to fend for themselves die. It's like for example, one of the examples of that. I remember the young lady that took the world by storm a couple of years ago. Wow, that's a couple of years ago easily now. Greta Thunberg. How dare you? I don't know how many of you were up to the times around that time. How dare you? And she was, her appeal was on climate change and the difficulties that the world is facing, and that we must make decisions to avoid the climate disaster, and we must make those decisions now. Grand. Now, she said that we must not stop fossil fuel tomorrow. We must not stop it next year. We must not stop it next 30 years. We must stop all use of fossil fuel now. Here's the thing. The second and third order consequences. It's the same thing as the reaction to the pandemic here. There are second and third order consequences to that. If we just stop fossil fuels, no more fossil fuels, nowhere, nothing for no, stop it, stop all of it. The carbon is going to kill us all, stop it now. Within probably a week, maybe 100 million people might die. Like that, quick. Because that's actually how the system works. That's actually the reality of it. And you might say, we have to stop all of the use of the fossil fuels now to save people and to save the future. And okay, that might be true. I am not even debating whether that is true or not. But at the same time, if we stop it now, we are going to kill a couple million people in the present. So, we have to balance those consequences here. Those consequences must be balanced. The consequences of what is going to happen tomorrow versus the consequences of what is going to happen next month versus the consequences of what is going to happen next year and next couple years. It's a little like comparing oranges and mandarins. I like that one. But that is the thing. The second and third order consequences of actions, I find a lot of times it's lacking. And to me, even if the lockdowns, etc., were the things that had to happen, and just in the same way we did it, that's what was needed to happen, the treatment of it as if there wasn't an understanding that things like this would have been the consequence. I didn't like that, because I think any thinking person back then was supposed to know that something like this was very possible. And now we see it. And bear in mind, this is an individual story, but this individual story is coming on the backdrop of the residents of Woodbrook complaining that there's an increase in the homeless situation in Woodbrook itself. So where are these increased homeless people coming from? And it's not only on the side of the homelessness. I was watching another article there, and another issue that seems obscure even, and when you look at it in the more detailed sense, you see that there might be a familiar link inside there. LSA, land grabbers in scheme for state money. A new type of squatter has emerged in Trinidad and Tobago in recent times. They are known as squat lords who squat on lands for financial gain and not because of economic hardship. While the overall numbers of squatters has decreased in recent years, there remain certain squatter hotspots in TT where some people have attempted to establish themselves as squat lords. These issues were raised at a virtual meeting between members of Parliament's local authorities, service commissions, and statutory authorities committee, the Land Settlement Agency, and the Agricultural Ministry on Wednesday. Squatters are people who settle on property without right or title or payment of rent or on public land to gain a title to that land. Now, squatting is a strange thing. I don't know if I have all of my mind made up about squatting yet and what I think about squatting. Because people need somewhere to live. Like, I am not a socialist nor a communist or anything as such, but people need somewhere to live. And if the country owns all the land and someone is born of the country, I kind of find that the country should somehow make it possible for them to get some amount of land to live on. Like, I find there should be some kind of way to provide for legal squatting. And based on whether you have lands or not. Like, that might be one of my most socialist leaning thoughts. Like, because in the first place, what is the state doing with land? Like, what is the government going to do with land? Like, even how the government does their housing and land, it's so confusing to me. They take a big chunk of land and they hire a big contractor, and then they part up the land in some little tiny plots. Yes, socialism is slavery. I understand. I understand. Yeah, and then they part it up into some tiny little plots and build houses on it and then give you these subpar houses. Like, if you were doing that and your interest was in giving people proper housing, then why don't you just sell them the land and allow them to have access to the same amount of money in the mortgage that they're going to pay you for the house after you build it, and then they would use that money on their own to hire small and medium contractors to build their homes for themselves. And that way, I can assure you the quality would increase because they would be watching and evaluating the quality of their own home as it builds, and you could have the district supervisors that you're supposed to have in the first place. You could have them evaluating the security of the building, how structurally secure the buildings are. So, like, I mean, if you were trying to get people housed properly, what they're doing right now doesn't even make sense in that realm. I don't understand that. I really don't. But on the side of squatting, from the moment the state owns land, if the state represents the people and the state owns land, I don't understand how the state that represents the people can own land and some people are landless. It just seems strange to me. It just seems strange to me. Went through a squatter development in Londonville today, and I tell you, if a fire was to take place, that whole village gone up in flames. That's true. Many of those squatter developments aren't exactly the most safe and secure places. But there are multiple reasons for that too. But you can't forget that land provides more resources than just housing. That is true. I don't deny that. But there's a lot of land that is earmarked for housing and used for nothing else. It's not used for any other positive purpose. So I don't understand what would be the other purpose. Anyway, let's go on. Committee Chairman Independent Senator Dr. Varma Diyal Singh observed there were many reasons why people squat. Those included property, unemployment, and eviction from their former homes. But Diyal Singh said there were some people who were land grabbers who squatted to get piece of the action, referring to some newspaper reports which claimed an increase in squatting during the COVID-19 pandemic. Diyal Singh asked LSC officials whether 2021 was the year of the squatter. Now, the LSA actually went on to say that no, there was not an increase in squatting in 2021. They did not see that. In fact, they saw a decrease in squatting in the years since, and they attribute it to the fact that the LSE now has superior technology. They're using drones, etc., to monitor some areas to make sure it doesn't happen. Now, I don't know how they could say that when I, with my own two eyes, have seen multiple squatting areas. I don't know what is going on with that, but they say the squatting has decreased. In fact, their statistics say that. Diyal Singh reiterated his concern about people with ulterior motives who are squatting. There are certain squatters who may have gone to areas to protest about the Komoto-Manzanilla highway. Some think if they go there, they will be paid to move. He said some squatters may be masquerading as farmers by cultivating short-term crops. Now, the thing is, that's not unheard of, but you can't, right? That's not unheard of. He is saying that in some areas, for example, where they're building the Komoto to Manzanilla highway, there are some people going to squat there, and they may be squatting with the intention of being compensated to move. And you see, that's part of the ridiculousness of how our government moves, how our government operates. You'd have state lands and you'd have it modeled in a strange way that if someone goes and stays there, then it's no longer really state lands, and then they must be paid to move from it. I remember when the highway going down south was being built, there were some accusations of some people in some lofty positions that they knew the route of the highway, so they were able to occupy lands in the route of the highway, and when the government was coming through, the government just paid everyone to move. It's like, and in a small country like ours, how does such a thing happen and no one knows? Everyone knows that. It's all, everyone involved in such a thing, I think, is just playing the game. Diyal Singh wondered whether Venezuelan migrants were engaged in this alleged practice and creating a wild, wild west situation. Now, I don't think Diyal Singh, in this case the independent senator, is speaking in just guessing here. I think he's speaking about things that he either has knowledge of or he heard of, because this does seem to be the case in some areas where the squatting is going on and there seems to be even migrants involved in it. And because of that, the entire atmosphere of legal and illegality playing in there, the entire thing becomes a Wild West situation because there aren't many rules followed there. The police don't get involved. The thing is, the squatter can't tell which lands are zoned for housing. That's part of the challenge. Hossain replied, there are certain hotspot areas in the country where we have a rush of persons going to squat. Sangre Grande and Valencia, especially where the Komoto to Manzanilla highway is being built, is one such area. He said, we have a term that we use, squat lords. A lot of these persons who are rushing into areas are rushing for commercial reasons rather than economic reasons. Diyal Singh replied, so definitely there has been a squatter invasion in certain areas like Sangre Grande, soon to be the squatting capital of Titi, and also Valencia. So, although the Land Settlement Agency is saying that over the pandemic there wasn't a general increase, there was a significant increase in certain areas in a certain type of squatting. So, in Sangre Grande, in the Far East, it seems to be the frontier of squatters' land, the Far East. And on top of it, what they are finding now is there's a different type of squatting going on now. And it makes sense. It makes sense. You see, I speak of something, I spoke of this in previous lives already. Not my theory, but something that I watch in history. When you watch how order works, how things work, how civilization works, if you will. If you have order in an area, civilization in an area, we live in an ordered fashion. Here we have rules, we have order, we have enforcement of the rules and order. Grand. If you have a breakdown of these rules and order, what happens is not that we all live free to our own devices. That's not actually what happens in reality. The Romans phrase it as the barbarians are at the gate. Meaning that as the Roman society drifted away from its base, its foundations, if you will, the barbarians were always at the gate. There was always another group outside there wanting to come in and take what you have. So, in Trinidad and Tobago, what I'm trying to say is that in Trinidad and Tobago, during the time of the pandemic there, when you had all of this difficulty going on, this change in how things function for quite some time, this lockdown in activities, and during the pandemic, of course, you couldn't go down during the pandemic and break down people's squatting homes. That's of course not possible during a pandemic. You'd get horrible publicity. And then you have a serious influx of migrants. So you have all of this combining together, and you'd get a local Trinidadian getting a little smart, because he'd notice, wait, I'm squatting here. I hold on a little piece of land here squatting. And I knock up some sheds. And these migrants come in and they want somewhere to live. I can rent out my sheds that I didn't pay for the land for. And I knocked it up with some wood I get from some scrap field somewhere. I could make them pay me $500 a month to live in that. And I will pack them in really tight, bring in a couple families, and soon I may be making $10,000 a month off of packing in these Venezuelans. Good night, Easy 868. You're a little late, but say what, you're still here. As per usual, if you're late inside of the live and you're wondering what we're talking about and you want to catch up on this, or any of the other lives, head over to my YouTube channel, Nathan Spring on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe over there, drop a like, drop a comment. If you are listening to this on repeat over on YouTube, be sure to comment and like, or share the video. You know, I don't usually say that, but you can share the live, share the video. If you think it's some good stuff, if you think it's stuff that people would like to see, copy it, share it somewhere. Say, hey, take in this guy. We talk some good stuff. Right. Good. So yeah, K-Jig is saying that we are a comedy show. This really happens. Yes, it does. And that's what they are saying there. Obviously, that's what happens. And the conditions that we created in the country help for these things to happen. The pandemic was part of what needed to be put in place for things like this to happen. Well, not the pandemic, actually, as I keep saying. It's actually the reaction to the pandemic, the actions we took to negate the pandemic. Please save the live. Thanks, great stuff. Well, that's the thing, Mr. Belgrave. Oh, sorry, not Mr. Belgrave Jasmine over on Instagram. That's the thing with the YouTube. All of the lives are saved over there. You can head over there at any point in time and take them in. And the articles that I read, they're scrolling behind me over on YouTube. So YouTube is a vibe. It's a vibe. It's not the prime live because it's slightly delayed when you're viewing it live. But be sure to subscribe over on YouTube. Nathan Springer over there. But yeah, these situations were created because of the environment that we helped to create also. That's what made these things possible. That's what made this certain area become this hotspot. That's what made the type of squatting morph into this new thing. But here's the thing. Even with the barbarians at the gates, it's always the strongest barbarian that wins. So, almost surely, in a situation like this, what you tend to see, the first. Correct, KJ. That's correct. The first person who does this may have been just a smart man. He figured out, wait, I was squatting and I can make some money with this. But then eventually, someone who has the violence behind them, the might to come in and enforce some rules, because remember, this is a lawless area. You have a set of Venezuelan migrants packed into a squatting village. You can't call the police to help you. So a gang comes in and notices, hey, this is a lucrative business. And they come with their guns and say, hey, look at me. Look at me. I am the squat lord now. And then you end up with a gang in control of a squatting shanty town. And what do you think happens after such a thing occurs? And some of them on top of that are putting the Venezuelan women to work. Of course they are. That is what would happen. If it's a gang, they're engaged in illegal activity, they don't care, they will do illegal activity. They will engage in as much illegal activity as they can. So how could we fix it? Increase monitoring, change laws? I suppose we can only mitigate it. Partly what I was saying is one of the ways that we fix such things is allow society to function in such a way that it doesn't have an incentive structure for such a thing to happen. If there are not enough men to populate gangs, if there are not enough young men, if there are not enough young, reckless men to populate gangs, there will be no gangs. The propulsion of gangs are almost in entirety young men between the ages of 14 to 28 thereabouts, because that's when they're athletic and reckless enough to do the dangerous and violent things that the gang might require them to do. That's the main driving force of many of these gangs. Granted, the leadership may usually be older, but the main driving force is that age group. Now, if you provide a way for that age group to not see themselves as having to use their youthful recklessness in an avenue such as gang warfare, you already decapitate gangs. If you reduce the ways that gangs can make money, you reduce the incentives for squatting, make state land reasonably available. Prefrontal cortex ain't developed yet. Correct, KJ. You're preaching, KJ. You're preaching out here. Make state land reasonably available. Yes. And increase the monitoring. And almost surely these things occur because very likely some state land inspector, because remember, right there, the state land guy was saying right earlier that they decrease the amount of squatting because they have technology now and they have drones, etc., and the drones keep them up to date. Trinidad is not that large. They would know where these squatting areas are. Very likely the thing that allows these horrible acts to continue and perpetuate is someone in a government state authority position perpetuating it. Someone involved there is being corrupt. In nearly every case, that's what is going on. In nearly every case of criminality, what allows it to continue is government involvement somewhere along the line. Otherwise, usually it's very difficult for it to continue. The government involvement usually is what allows it to continue. So the government stop being corrupt where the government is corrupt, and we solve so much of this. Now, in this present context, I am speaking of this as in what caused it, and saying that our quick trigger reaction in locking down for the pandemic caused some of these things. So it's not necessarily now speaking about the solution for it. I'm speaking about the cause of it. And speaking about the cause in terms of in looking forward in how we react to things and looking forward in how we deal with things, I think that's kind of important. It's kind of important in evaluating how you deal with things, as in understanding that the short-term consequences aren't the only consequences of something. There are other consequences involved, consequences that we may not see for years to come. So, do not let any issue that arises, do not let the loudest, most emotive voices that attempt to pull on your heartstrings, do not allow them to sway you to believe that necessarily the decision that sounds best in that angle or from that angle is the best decision. Because the reality of this now is that the consequences of our reactions to COVID-19 are causing, have caused, will be causing additional deaths. Human beings are going to die because of some of the lockdowns and some of the measures that we took place to reduce the deaths during COVID-19. That is fact. So, back then, when people were saying that if we don't lock down or if we don't do this and if we don't do this, are you going to kill grandma? Do you have no care for the people's lives? You only care about money. I remember a lot of people had that point they were making when people were negating, were saying that these lockdowns may not necessarily be the best move in this way. People were saying, do you only care about money? You don't care about lives. How much is a life worth? Well, now we are figuring that out. How much is a life worth? You see, when we were what some people were attempting to say back then was that it is a balanced equation of life versus life. It is an equation of that. In the present situation, it looks like, yes, it may risk some lives here, and very well it might risk some lives. But in the long term, it would always also risk some lives. You see, that's the difficulty with positions of leadership, And that's why, to me, any sensible person isn't hurried to be a leader. If you're a sensible person, you aren't hurried to be in positions of leadership. Because if you're a leader, think about this. If you're a leader, the decision that you actually have to make here is, if you're a sensible leader and you're a thinking leader, you know that lockdowns are going to cost lives in the long run. You know that, well, the scientists and the doctors say without lockdowns, you are going to cost lives in the short run. So lives are going to be cost either way. You as leader, you as the one who was arrogant enough to put up your hand and say, I am capable of leading all of these human beings and I know the right decisions to be made. You now have to make the decision whether the amount of lives lost by my decision that is going to hurt in the long term, or the amount of lives lost by my decision that may hurt in the short term, which set of lives am I willing to risk? It's the train track problem. You know, the story, the little story that they give regularly. Many people give a little philosophical moral story about a train and a track. And if it continues on the track, there are 5 people trapped on the track and they are all going to die. The train is going to run over them. You could change it from that track where it's going to kill 5 people, but when you change it from the track, it's going to go on another track to kill 1 person. Would you change it from the track? Now, that's a whole other moral story, and I'm not getting into the morality of that right now, but to me, that's one of the problems with leadership, where I find many people run into leadership and they seem not to understand that you are putting yourselves in the position to make the decision to change the track or not. And I am not sure I want to put myself in those kinds of places, at least not easily. Now, the unfortunate thing is because some people think enough to know that you don't go to put yourself in those places so easily. Sometimes the most arrogant people who don't think before they make those decisions, those are the same people now who end up in the position to be flipping tracks, and they're flipping tracks as they want, and it's not a decision between 5 people and 1 person. It's a decision between 500 people and 5,000 people, and they're just killing people out here. So yeah, it is a difficult decision. It is a difficult decision. My problem was that back then many people made it seem as if it was not a difficult decision, because the emotional answer was much easier to give. The emotional answer was much more straightforward. I could just come out and say, you can't kill anyone. One life saved is enough. One life saved. And if we could save one life, that's enough. Those were the kinds of statements being made. And here's the thing. I am not even saying that the lockdowns were not necessarily the better move. But the argument that one life saved is enough. Do you want to kill Granny? That's not the argument to be made in defense of that. Because as we can see now, lives are actually being lost and cost because of the consequences of those same lockdowns. So it was a lives versus lives decision all along. It always was. And I hope that people in places that have to actually make these decisions, as they see some of these things now, they are better able to hold their ground when they see questions come up about if one life saved isn't enough. And the thing is, for example, in the United States with their gun arguments that they are having right now, that's actually the argument that it is. That's actually the argument that it is. One side says that they are trying to save lives, and if you do not make some of these gun laws, if you do not pass some of these common sense gun laws, then you do not care about lives. But the actual argument from the next side is that what we are doing is trying to save lives too. And that's where you have to debate it, in whether which one saves lives. You can't debate it and say that one person wants to kill and one person wants them to stay alive. That's not actually where the argument is. And the emotional side of argument, the emotional side of arguments usually wins in that sense. But now we're seeing that, yeah, there are consequences to that. I have a question. Right before we go. Well, that's what resilience is about. Hopefully learning from the mistakes. Hopefully. That's quite a hope. I hope we learn too. But I have a question. One more story before we go. It has to do with the TSTT bacchanal that going on. For those who were here, I think yesterday we spoke about that TSTT wanting to lay off so many workers because they're saying that they cannot continue with that. The workers saying that they're just trying to union bust and the management made a wrong decision. So yeah, where we going? I don't know if you all hear rain falling in. If that rain only busts down harder here, all the audio going to go haywire and I really have to dive out. But there's some rain in the background. Yeah, but TSTT refused to allow some workers to enter. And their reasoning, and this is my question, their reasoning was that they feared sabotage. TSTT fears sabotage from retrenched workers. Here's my question. You all believe them? Like that fear? I could kind of understand it. If I already tell these workers I'm going to fire you, and I allow you back on the job, I kind of get the feeling like for those last couple weeks, I just kind of get the feeling, I'm not sure what might give me that inkling, but something gives me a kind of feeling that, you may not have the best interest of my company at heart. I could understand why a company might get that impression. It's the easiest excuse to use to deny access. That is also true. That is also true. It's an easy excuse to use. And the court has already said that you have to let them back in. So you're denying a court order. By the rules of the law, you are supposed to let them back in. But I am saying that, can't you see their point? Why, because the court basically said, according to the union leader, the court said that these workers have the option to go back to work or to stay home. As a worker, why would you want to go back to work? I'm not sure. Can someone explain that to me? Why do you think as a worker you'd want to go back to work? This company says they do not want me. They said they're going to fire me. They're supposed to give me 45 days of notice. They said, instead we'll pay you your 45 days, don't come back. Now I got a court order saying that they cannot do that quite yet. Let's see how this goes in the court. Why would I want to be on work? I am not sure. I am really not sure. Like, what exactly is the hope? The hope, I guess the hope could be that they may win a case in the industrial court that reverses the firing and forces TSTT to keep these workers on. But it was stated that these people are going to 850k to 750k in payment for inconvenience. Well, that was another story. The cost of the layoffs in TSTT is astronomical. Some hundreds of millions of dollars, 400 and something million dollars, I believe, it's going to cost them to do that retrenchment. Nisi says to get away from their spouse. Interesting says to cut a very important cable, and that is the very worry that TSTT is voicing, and I can understand. I think I can understand that. I think I can. It's a fair worry. If I fired these people, it's fair for me to worry that when they come back in, they may not have the best interest of my company at heart. And then especially if my company is one as such that it is an IT company, there's software involved, then sabotage is a very high possibility. That's a very high possibility. So why would they want to go to work when they already going to get paid off for it? I am not 100% sure. I am not 100% sure. Now, the reason I can think of is that the union seems to believe that the whole idea that TSTT has is TSTT is trying to get rid of all the workers. They want to crash TSTT as a company itself, get rid of the union, and go over to Amplia. So maybe their idea is that if they can get the workers to hold out as long as possible, they could get some kind of ruling going on different inside there, some kind of management change around that reverses course and they do not fire all of these workers. But I don't see that happening, to be very honest. So why would they want to go to work when they're already going to get paid off for it? Because we can't cut the cable from home. Interesting. You're playing we? Alright. I know you are IT man and a kid. Alright, interesting. The union is playing games. The union doing their job, The union doing their job. They're representing who they have to represent. The union is playing stupid games, as all unions do. The union representing who they have to represent. I just don't understand that really and truly. Like, if you were fired from the job, why do you need to go back? Now, I understand the court case. I understand why you should get the time. I understand why you should get the 45 days. But in a case like this, where the company has already broken the 45 days, they have already paid you off and already stopped you from going, maybe you could find the company for breaking the labor laws, and maybe the company has to pay me extra for the distress of sending me home early. And those are things I could ask for. Pay me extra for the distress of sending me home before the 45 days notice. All right, give me that. But I don't understand why you would want to go back on the job. Like, why? Really? Why? Doesn't quite make sense. This reminds me of the Cal retrenchment scenario too. But Amplia bought out Massey Technology some years ago, so this was a must go to. The thing is, TSTT isn't fully denying what the union is alleging. It's just that the version of the story that TSTT is giving and the version of the story that the union is giving is from two different angles. One is calling it a 6 and one is calling it a 9. Well, one is calling it 999 and the other is calling it 666. And they're watching the same thing and calling it from two different angles. TSTT is saying that the nature of the market that they are in, the nature of the industry that they are in, the nature of the market of the industry that they are in is as such that they have to advance. They have to restructure the model that they are currently working with. Technology is advancing. What people want, what the consumers are looking for, what the consumers are paying for is evolving, and they must evolve to keep up with that. Otherwise, they would not be able to continue to be profitable. Now, on the other hand, the union is saying that TSTT is trying to shut down TSTT, get rid of the union workers, and go over to Amplia. Here's the thing. Both of those things can be true at the same time. Those things are not mutually exclusive. They can both be true at the same time. When TSTT is talking about restructuring and building a company that works better in this modern technological landscape, they may be talking about getting rid of union workers and going over to Amplia. That's exactly how they restructure the company to be more profitable in these times. If the problem with the company kind of involves the structure of the amount of workers they hired in the first place, then getting rid of some of those workers is part of the restructuring. Yes, but Easy says yes, but Massey had that same flaw where their rates wasn't friendly, so that side of business was a ... So the union and the company may actually be agreeing with each other. And what do you do in such a case? I was wondering, the union is alleging that it's managerial decisions that caused the company to be losing so much money, and the fault is at the management level. Okay. Let's say that the union is correct. The managerial decisions cost the company millions of dollars. What do we do now? The company is running at a deficit. Hundreds of millions of dollars apparently. What do we do now? Like, what is the union's solution to that? Even if they fire all the old managers, hire new managers, still, what do we do now? The company is still in a deficit. Does the government pay out the deficit of the company? So then, are we saying that the managers run the company to the ground and the government just tops up the company like a phone card afterwards? That's the recommendation. Now, you could say that the company has to sue the managers, and then if they win in the court and they get back those hundreds of millions of dollars that those managers squandered, then you can pay that to the workers. And to be honest, I will agree with that idea. That's a grand idea. Let the unions organize some way to sue the management and administration over the last couple of years who misspent the money that they said, those hundreds of millions of dollars. get back all of that money wherever it went, and when you get that back, you can pay it to all of the workers. Because the problem is, where does the money come from? I have no problem. We could pay all the workers in the world. Like when people talk about the minimum wage, why raise the minimum wage at all? Why not raise it to $100 an hour? Why not raise the minimum wage to $1,000 an hour? That would be grand. The problem is always, where is the money going to come from? So okay, TSTT management mismanaged for years. Now they are in arrears, they are in debt, the company is running at a deficit, they're running at a loss. What do we do now? Even if you get rid of those managers, get new managers to do the right thing, now very likely they are going to have to get rid of a lot of workers too. They are going to very likely have to start back over from a pretty rudimentary spot to get things done seriously. And I am fed up. I am sorry to some of the public servants out there. I don't necessarily mean some of you, because I'm sure some of you work really hard. But I'm really fed up of hearing so many of the workers always repeat the mantra that it's not the workers' fault, it's always the management's fault. At some point in time, that starts to sound ridiculous. It's never the workers' fault, it's always the management's fault. Now, here's the thing. The Nuremberg trials after World War II. Yes, this is on YouTube. This is streaming on YouTube right now. We are live over on YouTube also. Yeah. The Nuremberg trials after World War II, where they were prosecuting some of those soldiers that were in charge of the camps that, mustache guy from World War II Germany had. They were prosecuting some of those soldiers that were in charge of the camp, some of the guards. And some of the guards were saying that, it was not their fault, it was the system. It was not their fault, it was the administrators, the management and the administrators were the ones that sent these instructions down, and they were just following the instructions of the management and administrators. But the War Crimes Tribunal back then found, yes, they sent home people two times already. And in one of the previous groups of people they sent home was actually the head of the union. The head of the union was in one of those previous retrenchments. Yeah, but the War Crimes Tribunal also noted way back then that you can't blame your individual actions on any systemic problem. Your individual actions are your actions nonetheless. So if your actions are actions of an inefficient worker, you can't blame the administrators for that. Those are your actions. You are an inefficient worker because you do so by choice. It's tedious at some point in time. It's always the system. It's always someone else's fault. And then the management would say it's not our fault, it's the system. Then those ahead of them would say it's not our fault, it's the system we inherited. And it's all the system and the system and the system. So the system is all some nebulous concept that no one is involved with. No one has control over the system, but everyone is involved in it at the same time. That is ridiculous. At some point in time, you have to take a step back and notice that this argument does not make sense. This isn't a reasonable stance to have. So how many people them really had employed in there? That was the problem, Nisi. They had a lot of people employed in there, and not only they had a lot, they were employed and paying them over the market value. They were paying people too much. I don't know how many of you remember the audit from Wassa Research. That was what, a couple years ago, or a couple, where they were noting that the ratio of managers to staff in Wassa was ridiculous. No company in the world functions on that ratio. Like there's supposed to be a ratio of the amount of supervisors you have to the number of lay workers, then the number of managers to the number of supervisors, the number of senior managers to the number of junior managers, etc., etc. The ratios in Wassa was haywire because all kind of people were being pulled into Wassa, and you got a job as a senior this and a senior that and an executive this, an administrative that, and manager of this, and supervisor over that. And your salary was tall, your salary heavy, and now you're not the fault, though it's not my fault, it's the system. And when the country busts in, when the union call for pay, you on the top pick with a picket in your hand. We want we money right now. We want we money right now. Overworked and underpaid, and you're out there clamoring, why is Trinidad this way? And you're part of the reason Trinidad is this way. You took the job as a senior something knowing that you weren't qualified to be a senior something quite yet, and bam, you take that job, and now you're out there on the front line. You feel yourself to be more honest than everyone else, and you're part of the reason Trinidad is the way it is. You know, I was singing along with you. Of course you were. Of course you would. And like I was speaking about the social welfare ministry, where all that crookishness was going on inside there. And when the police went in, they closed ranks. They weren't talking to the police, you know. Bad man don't snitch. Snitches get stitches. No informer inside of here. That's the social ministry we're talking about. The social welfare ministry. People to help people, the people to help the poor people, acting like a gang inside there. But no, they need to have on a black Air Max or a black Air Force in order to really be in a gang. I find personally things like that wrap up the whole group of them. They are involved in a criminal conspiracy. Send them down in a gang. The contemplation I might do tomorrow. I was speaking to the DSS guy about some of the latest charges against him, and you know, DSS, the maths never did maths, but to be honest, nearly everyone involved in DSS knew that the maths wasn't mathsing. But when you watch even some of the charges in that, the charges are kind of ridiculous when you think about how general society functions. That people do the very same thing that you may be charged with. Something you may be charged with, someone else might be doing that day in, day out, every day on a normal basis, and that's how they make millions of dollars. If you dare do it, you're going to jail. And consider this, anyone who stands to benefit from that will never shout it for the world to hear. That's very true. That's very true. A lot of people in and around these things are complicit inside of it. They're complicit. They're part of the reason the system is the way it is, and then they complain about the system being the way it is. A very strange thing. A very strange thing. All right, that's all I have for now, folks. There's no afterlife tonight. I will see you all tomorrow. It's a nice rainy night. What's not a storm, a tropical system is in the region tonight and over the weekend, so we'll have some nice rainy cool nights. Good stuff. So I hope you're educated, informed, or entertained, and I will see you again for the next Mindful Live tomorrow at 9:30 p.m. Peace out. See y'all then.